2006, an anonymous donor approached Maine Preservation and Maine Community Foundation about setting up a fund for churches across the state. As a sailor, the donor had noted that from the water, church steeples marked the location of village centers and wished to help preserve them. Maine Steeples Fund was formed that year as a partnership among these three entities and has been striving to preserve Maine's iconic church steeples ever since. Because of the administrative complexity of running this program, in 2019, the Maine Steeples Fund was reestablished independent of Maine Community Foundation, while Maine Preservation remained in partnership along with two other advisory board members. Over these years, from Aroostook County to York County, Maine Steeples Fund has been at the forefront of ensuring the continued stability of over 75 steeples and counting. The expense associated with ongoing maintenance of church steeples is often daunting for a small congregation or civic organization to afford, given the scale and height of the towers, architectural details requiring specialized craftspersons, materials, and custom millworks. The logistic and financial difficulties in taking on restoration efforts often give congregations pause before even getting started. Maine Steeples Fund has helped church congregations and nonprofit groups bridge the often significant gap between enthusiasm, professional guidance, demonstrated need, and available funding. Maine Steeples Fund provides two types of assistance: help with assessing the conditions of the steeple and the overall church building, and restoration funding. Pre-assessments and full assessments of conditions provide critical planning and guidance, which form the basis of successful steeple restoration projects. Pre-assessments are provided at no cost to qualified applicants, while full assessments are made possible through a generous 90% matching grant of up to $5,000. The fund has enabled numerous groups across the state to perform fundamental assessments that identify deficiencies that may not be immediately evident and establish the framework and priorities of needed interventions. These, in turn, define the scope of work, scheduling, and fundraising goals needed to begin the process of steeple restoration. Upon successfully completing assessments, selected applicants are invited to apply for a steeple restoration grant. These 50% matching grants, up to a maximum of $60,000, are applied to the stabilization and restoration of steeples within the scope of work identified during the conditions assessment. Maine Steeples Fund also maintains a list of best practices which help grant recipients in material selection, design, and construction strategies, using the Secretary of the Interior standards as guiding principles. The critical importance of this program is indicated by the amount of matching funding that small congregations, some numbering only in the teens and 20s, are able to raise. Over the course of the last 14 years, Maine Steeples Fund has awarded more than $1.1 million in grants to aid in the restoration and preservation of these vital contributors to the cultural landscape of the entire state. Maine's church steeples are irreplaceable reminders of our state's rich architectural and social heritage, and without the preservation-minded Maine Steeples Fund, these architectural treasures would be of imminent danger of being lost to future generations to enjoy in all but photographs. For outstanding dedication, focus, and impact on critical, highly visible features of the historic built environment, Maine Preservation is pleased to honor the Maine Steeples Fund with the Earle G. Shettleworth Jr. Preservation Champion Award.
I think it's important to note that the Maine Steeples Fund was instrumental in making this project happen. The parish sought a grant to do the assessment, which we did, and we've done this on many church projects, but they sought that money out, were granted the money it took to do an assessment on the project, which Ben and Scott and I did in the middle of February. We always seem to do these in the coldest months of the year. So we were up in a bucket. I think it was probably middle of February or January doing those assessments on the outside. But they also accessed the Maine Steeples Fund for rehabilitation funds and were granted a significant amount of money that really made the project happen. It may not have happened if they hadn't secured that funding. So I think that's important to say, because that's important funding that's out there.
No doubt about it. That process is so vital to getting these rehabilitation projects even recognized in the first place, never mind accomplished. So having these fund sources available is really key.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Maine Steeples Fund today, and that's it's an organization that is, it keeps a pretty low profile. I'd like to tell the folks a little bit about it now. Steeples play a unique role in the landscape of Maine, and it's really something that many of us take for granted. I used to. And Maine Steeples Fund is devoted only to steeples, only in small Maine communities. In the development of a community, from a settlement to a community, I've read before that they regarded themselves as truly independent when they had three things: a blacksmith, a grist mill for grinding corn and wheat flour, and a church. And in the growth of many of the communities around the state of Maine, we know that small towns can have 3 or 4 different churches and different steeples. And they play an important role in the community beyond the religious imagery of a steeple. Steeples are often in the town center. And the bell in the steeples was used not just for religious services, but to mark important events within the community. And the 1,000-pound, the bells often were 1,000 pounds each. The clocks, interestingly, are often not owned by the churches, the steeple clocks, but rather paid for and maintained by the towns, again, because of the central role that these architectural elements played in the community. And also along the coast, steeples are often used as navigational aids for the fishing fleets to find home. There are more than 2,000 steeples in the state of Maine, many 100, 200 years old each, and they suffer from the ravages of wind, rain, lightning, gravity. And as church congregations have dwindled and worked with more and more strained budgets, it's become more and more difficult to maintain these steeples. And once a steeple starts to decline structurally, it can be a slippery slope. Band-aids don't work well with steeples. Water gets in, rot starts, structural problems begin, and the problems can be very difficult to diagnose and overwhelmingly expensive to correct. And that's where the Maine Steeples Fund comes in. Over the past 12 years, the Maine Steeples Fund has actively restored 75 or so steeples in the state of Maine and worked on dozens more. And I play a small role in the organization. I have the good fortune to work with subject matter experts like Aaron Sturgis from Preservation Timber Framing, and of course our Greg Paxton from Maine Preservation. And the way that we proceed is a church, a congregation, or any nonprofit will make an application to introduce themselves to us, and we will decide whether we want to issue an assessment grant. We pay for 90% of the assessment to have an expert go all the way through the church to come up with recommendations for repair, but focusing only on the steeples as far as our financial participation. And then we help the small groups, in many cases. We help the organization come up with a restoration plan. And then we participate in restoration grants paying up to 50% with a fairly high cap on what we pay for. So as I said, I play a very small role in the organization, but I'm the one here accepting the award. The award named in honor of my cousin, actually, Earle Shettleworth. But it's a pleasure for all of us to accept this award from Maine Preservation. Thank you very much.